What would you do if your own daughter looked you in the eye and told you to hand over your credit card? Or get out of her house? That was the moment everything shifted. The words weren't shouted, but they cut sharper than any scream. And before I could even react, the mug tipped. Boiling coffee splashed across my lap, soaking through my thin pants, biting into my skin like fire. The cup shattered against the tile, pieces scattering across the floor like teeth knocked loose in a fight. Lucia stood over me, arms folded, her face expressionless, like she was reciting office policy. Not a flicker of regret, not a twitch of hesitation. The smell of burnt coffee rose up as I stared at the dark stain spreading across my clothes. I didn't move. The sting was sharp, but sharper still was the silence that followed, the kind of silence that tells you you've been erased in your own child's eyes. For that moment, I wasn't her father anymore. I was just a burden. And yet, in that quiet, something stirred inside me. A promise. This wasn't surrender. This was the beginning of a debt she would have to pay, the kind no credit card could cover. She turned her back first, rinsing her hands at the sink as if she'd spilled nothing more than dishwater. Don't make this harder. Dad, Pablo needs this. You got money sitting there collecting dust. What's the point of family if you won't help? The way she said family made the word sound like an insult. Pablo sat across from me, slouched in his chair, phone glowing in his hands, not even pretending to care. 16, and already convinced the world owed him. He wanted thousands for a gaming setup, and Lucia backed him like his lawyer. I dabbed at my lap with a napkin. The burn stung, but it was nothing compared to the ache rising in my chest. I'd seen flames before, real ones. 30 years as a firefighter taught me what true heat can do to a body, a home, a life. But this small act of contempt, it burned deeper than any blaze I'd ever fought. I'm not giving my card, I said, my voice steady though each word scraped my throat raw. She turned, her arms still crossed, her mouth curled in a smirk I didn't recognize from the girl I had raised. You're lucky we let you stay here after your surgery, she shot back. Do you remember who paid your bills, picked up your prescriptions, cooked your meals? And now you want to lecture me about money? Her words came fast, rehearsed, like she'd been saving them for this exact moment. Each one hit heavy, but I didn't flinch. I stayed quiet, and my silence seemed to anger her more. Either you hand over the card, or you'll be gone by sunset. That's final. The burn on my thighs pulsed, but slowly I rose to my feet, straightened my back, and looked her dead in the eye. I'll be gone before the sun goes down, I said. For a second, her smirk faltered. She expected me to beg, to break. Instead, I gave her a promise, and promises can't be revoked. I walked down the hall, each step heavier than the last, dragging pieces of my old life with me. The family photos lining the wall watched as I passed. There she was, 6 years old, grinning with a missing tooth, clutching her stuffed rabbit. There her mother, gone now more than a decade, smiling in the sunlight we thought would last forever. I paused at a picture from her college graduation, my arm around her, my face proud, her eyes full of hope. I thought I had done right by her. But the woman in that kitchen wasn't the girl in that photo. Somewhere between that smile and the coffee scalding my lap, she had changed. Or maybe I had just been too blind to see it. In the guest room, the air smelled of laundry soap and old antiseptic. My suitcase sat in the closet, dusty but waiting. I dragged it out, my hip aching from the effort, but pain was something I could live with. I opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out an envelope I'd hidden months ago. Copies of my birth certificate, insurance cards, a slip of paper with my bank information scribbled in my shaky hand. At the time, I didn't know why I kept them there. Now I did. Some part of me had always known this day would come. I sat on the edge of the bed, suitcase at my feet, hands trembling not from weakness but from clarity. From the living room, the TV clicked on. Laughter filled the house, but none of it belonged to me. Not once did she knock on the door. Not once did Pablo check if I was all right. They'd made their point. I began folding my shirts carefully, each one stacked like I was preparing for a journey I already knew was mine to take. At the back of the drawer, I found a small leather pouch. Inside was a pearl ring, my late wife's. I hadn't looked at it in years. I held it in my palm, remembering her warmth, her steady hand. Maria, I whispered to the empty room. You'd know what to do. A tear threatened, but I held it back. Resolve mattered more than tears now. I zipped the suitcase shut. The sound was final, like a door closing. I glanced again at that graduation photo. My smile then had been full, proud. Now it wasn't pride I felt. It was steel. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Silence doesn't mean surrender. They thought I would beg, that I would cling. They were wrong. As I lifted the suitcase, my eyes caught a notebook under the bed, my old grocery pad. On the last page were numbers, my account numbers. She had taken the card, but she hadn't thought to take this. I slipped it into my pocket, steadying my breath. By nightfall, I would be gone. Not broken, not discarded, just gone. And one day, Lucia and Pablo would understand. Contempt always comes with a price. The pages hit me like punches I couldn't block. Strange purchases stacked on top of each other. Late-night food deliveries I had never ordered. Online stores I had never visited. Streaming subscriptions with names I didn't even recognize. And then the worst of it, gaming transactions, thousands of dollars bleeding away over months. My pension wasn't disappearing all at once. It was leaking out, drop by drop, until there was nothing left for me to stand on. The last one had been just yesterday. $600 gone in an electronics shop. Evan. I could see his face in my mind, lit by the glow of a screen, grinning as though my money was a toy. My fingers dug into the arms of the chair until my knuckles turned white. The scalding burn on my thighs from earlier still throbbed, as if to remind me this wasn't new. This wasn't sudden. This was who they had become. Lena had exploded out of nowhere tonight. She had been sharpening herself piece by piece, waiting for the day she no longer had to ask permission for anything. I printed the statements one by one, the old printer groaning, coughing, spitting out each page like a tired witness forced to testify. I stacked them neatly, aligning their edges, feeling their weight in my hands. These weren't just papers. They were proof. Proof that my silence had been mistaken for surrender. Proof that my trust had been twisted into their ladder for greed. Then I saw it. Tucked between the losses, a single ember glowing faintly. A deposit, not a withdrawal. My disability payment from the firefighters' union, somehow untouched. Maybe she didn't know about it. Maybe she dismissed it as too small compared to the pension. Whatever the reason, it was still mine. Untouched, unclaimed. The discovery filled my chest with air I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. She hadn't taken everything. Not yet. I closed the folder and stared at the names on my phone. So many old friends reduced to numbers, most of them gone, moved, or buried. But there was one Mateo, once my neighbor, once my brother in the firehouse. We used to share beers on the porch after long shifts, laughing about things only men who had walked into flames together could laugh about. After retiring, he had gone into law. Nothing glamorous, small disputes, wills, paperwork. But he was steady, fair, and unshakable. I pressed his name. The line clicked, and his voice came steady, warm, unbroken by time. Luis? Everything all right. For a second, my throat refused to work. Then I swallowed and said, Not exactly, but it will be. I need your help. He didn't hesitate, just cleared his throat and said, Tell me where you are. Minutes later, a knock at the door pulled me from the shadows of my own house. His voice came low but solid. It's me. I grabbed the suitcase, slid the folder inside, tucked the notebook into my jacket pocket. The photographs in the hallway watched me pass. Lena as a child clutching her stuffed rabbit, as a teenager in her soccer uniform, as a graduate with that proud but hungry smile. Each one seemed to accuse me for not seeing what she would become. When I opened the door, Mateo stood there in his navy windbreaker, eyes sharp but kind. He glanced at the suitcase. You ready? I nodded. Behind me, the house glowed warm and false, light spilling through the windows like a lie. Ahead, the night stretched wide and uncertain but open. For the first time in years, silence didn't choke me. It belonged to me. On the drive, Mateo didn't press me for details. He let the hum of the tires fill the space. Steady as the man I remembered, I held the folder against my chest like it was a fragile organ keeping me alive. By the time we reached his house, the steadiness in his voice was the only thing keeping my knees from buckling. Inside, the smell of lemon oil and old coffee wrapped around us. On the dining table, a yellow legal pad and 2 mugs were already waiting under the glow of a single lamp. He had prepared, as if he'd known before I called that I would come. We spread the statements across the table. The charges told the story my mouth had failed to tell for months. Mateo slid his glasses down and read carefully, each line turning him from neighbor into lawyer. Streaming packages stacked. You don't watch these. I watch the weather. Maybe a free ball game. He circled another section. Electronics. Food deliveries. In-game purchases. Not a one-off. A pattern. He scribbled Evan's name beside it, without even asking. When his eyes found the union deposit, he paused. She hasn't touched this. She doesn't know about it, I said, or didn't care. That's something, he said, and his voice made it sound like more than just a scrap of hope. He tapped the notebook. What's in here? My handwriting. Accounts. I wrote them down months ago. Forgot why. Remembered tonight. He studied the last page, then slid it gently back. Good. We'll build a timeline. Every charge, every note, every slip of control. This isn't about shouting. It's about evidence. We let the paper speak. We worked together like men clearing rubble after fire. Slow, patient, deciding what mattered and what didn't. My shame deepened when we discovered her email tricks. Filters that hid my bank notices. Rules that sent my friends' messages into silence. But Mateo only printed them out and said, evidence isn't an argument. It's a timestamp. By midnight, the table was covered with papers, each one a piece of truth I had almost surrendered. Mateo leaned back, pen still in hand. Tomorrow we go to the bank. Fraud specialist. Calm. Direct. We freeze her access. Then we move your money to a new account, different bank. New email. Locked down tight. I felt something strange settle in me. Not revenge. Not victory. Something steadier. Like the quiet strength of a man who has finally picked up the hose and faced the flames again. You won't believe what happened next. The words came out of me before I even understood why. I think she rerouted some of my mail. I told Mark, my voice tight, but steady. I can't prove it, but I honestly can't remember the last time I held an envelope with my own name on it. I'd like to hold one again. He didn't comment, just scribbled it on the list like it was one more piece of evidence in a case we were quietly building. At 2 a.m, the kettle whistled in his kitchen, sharp and sudden, as if reminding us that even silent wars deserve a cup of tea. He poured, I signed, and together we scanned forms into the glow of his phone. The little blue progress bar inched forward like a lifeline climbing a wall. My eyes burned now and then, not from the hot coffee Karen had thrown on me earlier, but from what I could finally see taking shape in front of me. Mark never asked if I wanted to stop. That was his kindness. Instead, when 3 a.m. hit, he looked up and said softly, "Get some sleep? Guest room's ready. Sheets are clean. Door locks from the inside." He said it more like a safety feature than an offer of comfort, and I caught the meaning. I rose, knees complaining, and shuffled toward the hallway. Before I stepped out, he touched my arm lightly. Not a grab, just a steadying touch like men give each other when words aren't enough. "Let the papers do the talking," he said. The guest room window overlooked a maple tree, its leaves whispering against the dark. I laid down fully clothed, old firefighter habits never leaving me, ready to move at a moment's notice, not because I expected flames, but because the routine calmed me. The burn on my thighs ached when I shifted, but it felt less like punishment and more like proof. At some point I slept. When morning came, we were already at the bank by 7. The branch was small, the kind where tellers still recognize you if you wear the same hat twice. The manager led us into his office the moment Mark flashed his no-nonsense posture. He wasn't threatening, but he carried the air of someone there to fix a leak before it became a flood. Soon, a county investigator named Na joined us. She had a folder thicker than ours and a way of sitting that took up exactly the right amount of space. No apology, no overreach, We laid out our evidence, dates, statements, emails. The manager's tie tightened with every page, and finally he loosened it unconsciously. "Let's put a hold on the account," he said. "We'll reissue your card, freeze suspicious charges, and push the rest for review." Na's pen moved fast as she added, "I'll also file an elder financial exploitation notice." Somehow, the word elder didn't sting when she said it. It sounded more like a shield than a label. When she asked if I'd give a statement, I surprised myself by saying yes immediately. The words came sharp and clean. I did not authorize. I did not receive. Each sentence was like pulling out a splinter, painful but necessary. By the time she slid her card across the table, I no longer felt ashamed. She told me, "If she shows up and pressures you, call me. No scenes, just no secrets." I nodded and tucked the card into my wallet. The same wallet Karen had failed to wrestle for me last week. From there, we headed to the credit union. The woman at the desk, Clarissa, smiled at me like a human being. Not a problem. Together we opened a fresh account, secured it with codes and questions only I could answer. Watching the confirmation text arrive on my phone felt like seeing small boats dock safely after a storm. At the county recorder's office, Mark asked for my deed. The clerk handed back the paper showing my name alone, untouched for nearly 3 decades. Relief came heavy, like a weight dropping from my chest. Mark didn't smile. He's not the type, but he did nod, and that nod was worth more. We grabbed coffee and sandwiches that tasted more like fuel than food. On the drive back, my phone buzzed with a text. USPS change of address confirmed. My mail had been rerouted to a P.O. box I'd never heard of, authorized in my name. The date was 3 months back. I passed the phone to Mark, who passed it to Na. No one said much. She clipped the screenshot into the growing folder. "This doesn't look like care," she said. "It looks like theft." By evening, the folder on Mark's table had grown thick. Fraud notices, bank holds, copies of deeds, screenshots. We sat in the quiet hum of his lamp, making a list for tomorrow. Reverse the forwarding, notify Social Security, meet with a trust lawyer. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't cinematic, but it was structure brick by brick. And for the first time in months, I wanted sleep not to escape the day, but to meet the next one. Morning came with a mower droning down the block. Mark stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, scribbling notes. "We've got appointments lined up," he said. "Fraud investigator this afternoon. Deed copy secured. Credit union flagged attempted logins. Someone's already trying to break into the new account." His calm voice didn't sugarcoat it. That's what people do when you shut off their faucet. They bang the pipes. We started with the post office. I reversed the forwarding myself, voice steady, ID in hand. The clerk, glasses hanging from a chain, didn't argue. She printed the form, slid it over, and gave me the key to a new P.O. box. "Check it every other day," she said. "Not because it'll be full, but because it's yours." I turned the small key in my hand like a coin, then tucked it safely into my wallet. Later, we met Frank at a diner, a friend from the firehouse. Broad shoulders, now a broad middle, hands like shovels wrapped around a coffee mug. He hugged me hard once, the kind of hug that checks for damage and finds you still standing. When Mark explained everything, Frank shook his head at the part about Karen pouring coffee on me. His eyes darkened, then steadied. "All right," he said finally, voice like a hammer finding its nail. "Then we'll just build you a different kitchen." He slid me a card, his trusted realtor. "She'll walk your property, quiet and clean. No circus, no noise. If you're keeping it, she'll tell you how to lock it down. If you're selling, she'll guard the process." I thought of the appointment scheduled under my stolen email. Frank's jaw clenched. "Not you, huh? Then they're either testing value or lining up a refinance you'll never see." He scribbled 2 words on a napkin. "Chain custody. From now on, every step of your house goes through people who know what those words mean. No appraiser meets you alone. No signature without a witness. They want a crack in the wall? We'll seal it before they even find mortar." The waitress dropped plates we hadn't ordered. Eggs, toast, fruit. We ate out of habit, not hunger. Food was fuel, and we were men with ladders still to raise. Karen's smile at the school play was the kind of smile that tried too hard, the kind people put on when they know others are watching. Her voice was hushed but sharp, carrying that edge she reserved for when she was cornered. "What are you doing here?" she asked, still smiling for the benefit of the other parents within earshot. "I came to watch my grandson," I said plainly. My tone was even, not confrontational. It was the truth, and truth has a way of unsettling liars. Her eyes flickered, searching for a weakness, a crack, but I kept my face calm. Mark stood a few feet behind her, arms crossed, scanning the crowd like a man convinced everyone else was beneath him. "You didn't tell us," she said finally. I leaned slightly forward, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "I don't need your permission to see my grandson on stage. Not anymore. Not ever again." That smile faltered. She blinked once, too long, then turned away, tugging Mark by the sleeve. They didn't speak to me for the rest of the evening, but I didn't need them to. My presence alone was enough. The play itself was clumsy but endearing, a group of children stumbling through lines they barely remembered. Evan spotted me in the audience, his eyes wide, almost surprised I was there. He didn't wave, but his voice seemed to grow a little louder on his next line. Maybe, deep down, he still knew who I was. Afterward, as families gathered in small clusters, Karen guided Evan straight to the car, avoiding me like a shadow avoids a light. Mark glanced back once, his jaw tight, before following them. I didn't chase, didn't call out. I had no reason to anymore. They could run from me in public, but they couldn't run from a paper trail I had neatly stacked in my lawyer's office. That night, I wrote in my old leather-bound journal, not out of habit, but because I wanted a record of the shift. I wrote down how Karen's face had changed when she realized I wasn't backing down, how Mark's silence was louder than his arrogance. I wrote about Evan, how his eyes had softened when he saw me, and how that moment reminded me there was still something worth salvaging beyond the wreckage. The next morning, Frank called again. "They're rattled," he said. "Word spreading that Karen's been asking questions around the neighborhood, trying to figure out what you're doing. She doesn't like being out of the loop." "Good," I said. "Let her wonder. Let her guess wrong." By midday, Elena emailed a draft letter addressed formally to Karen and Mark. It was short, precise, and cold as stone. It reminded them of their revoked authority, stated clearly that all financial and property matters were under trust protection, and warned that any further attempts would be documented as evidence of fraud. There was no anger in it, no accusations, just facts stacked neatly into sentences that left no room for denial. I read it twice and signed without hesitation. The letter was mailed by certified post that afternoon. No spectacle, no shouting, just the sound of paper sliding into an envelope and the certainty of its weight landing in their hands. That evening, I sat on Mark's porch again, the same place where silence had once felt heavy. Now it felt different. Silence was my ally. It was a space where strength collected before striking. The maple trees swayed gently, and I thought of battles I'd seen in the Navy, how often victory wasn't won with noise, but with patience. This was no different. Karen texted later that night. Just one word. "Why?" I didn't answer. There are questions that don't deserve answers, only consequences. The following days passed with an odd stillness. No confrontations, no calls from banks, no strangers showing up at my door. It felt like the eye of a storm, and I knew enough about storms to recognize that calm doesn't mean safety. It means something bigger is circling. On the third day, Elena called. Their lawyer reached out. They're rattling sabers, but not filing anything official yet. That's a good sign. It means they're nervous. "What do we do?" I asked. "Nothing," she said simply. "We wait. They've already made mistakes, and the more they panic, the bigger those mistakes will get." Her voice was steady, almost casual, but I could hear the undertone of strategy. She knew what I was beginning to learn. Sometimes restraint cuts deeper than aggression. That night, I slept better than I had in years. My dreams weren't filled with footsteps in the hall or Karen's flat, rehearsed tone. Instead, I dreamt of quiet houses, of doors with locks that only opened for the right key, of mornings that began with coffee made the way I liked it, For the first time, the future didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like a chessboard, and for once, I wasn't the piece being moved. I was the one planning the moves. Raphael leaned in at the school play, voice low enough to hide, sharp enough to cut. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I kept my eyes on the stage. No, Raphael, you did that when you thought no one would notice the papers you signed with my name. His jaw tightened. Fear flashed before he pulled on a smirk. You got no proof. I didn't bite. We'll see. Karen's hand clamped his sleeve, her smile cracking just enough to show nerves. They slipped into the crowd. I stayed seated, patient, letting presence do what shouting never could. Back home, I opened my notebook and wrote everything down, dates, words, slights, forged lines. Memory can be waved away. Records cannot. Nights stretch like old Navy watches. Still, alert, eyes on dark water. Danger rarely arrives when you expect it. You wait. You breathe. You let the rope you set disappear under leaves. Her fear arrived first. Dad, we need to talk about the house, Karen said, breath thin. The bank mentioned irregularities. We could lose everything if you press this. I let her hear herself. You call me a burden and poured coffee on me. Do burdens carry houses, pay tuition, keep roofs from collapsing? She sniffled. I didn't soften. I won't be erased. Not legally, not financially, not as your father. I ended the call. Justice doesn't always come with symbols. Sometimes it's frost. Quiet, steady, unstoppable. A week later the letter came. County notice of pending foreclosure. On their address. My name was still attached to the loan. So they had to tell me. My hands didn't shake. Arrogance always turns a gun toward its own chest. That night, she called again. Dad, please. The bank. I let silence stretch until it hummed. You've treated me like a breathing credit card. Now you wanted to fund the lie? No. Her breath hitched, and she hung up. Raphael pounded on my door the next day, posture set to intimidate. He paced my living room, polished shoes creaking. If this foreclosure goes through, we're all ruined. Your name's on it, too. I folded my arms. The difference is, I didn't forge anything. The court will see that. His face darkened. You drag your own daughter through scandal? I kept my voice level. You drag her the moment you sold her an easy lie. Weak men make noise. Strong men bring paper. He flinched. Sweat beaded at his collar. He slammed the door on his way out, and his hand shook on the knob. 2 days later, Evan's principal called. In her office, she spoke carefully. He's been telling classmates his parents will buy a boat once they get rid of some old man problems. He seems confused. Kids repeat what they hear at home. I thanked her and left with my jaw tight. If they wanted a war of stories, mine would come with timestamps. That evening I told Elena, it's time. We filed. Fraud, forgery, the whole list. The next weeks were paperwork and quiet hearings. Raphael left one voicemail thick with threats. I didn't listen to the end. Mark gathered exhibits. Not added the forwarding rules and bank logs. Frank and Carla's notes on the property sat like anchors in a file. When court day came, I wore my old Navy blazer, brass buttons polished until they caught the light. I wanted the judge to see a man who had stood through fires and was done being erased. They looked smaller across the aisle. Karen's eyes skipped anywhere but mine. Raphael tried to sit tall, but his hands betrayed him, picking and fidgeting as if the truth itched. Elena laid out the record in clean lines. The trust recorded, the deed in my name alone, the email rules diverting statements, the change of address to a hidden box, card charges in the dead of night, signatures that weren't mine. Raphael's counsel sputtered, paper didn't. When the judge finally spoke, her voice rang like glass. This court finds sufficient evidence of fraud and forgery. Restitution is ordered. Foreclosure will proceed under corrected documentation. Primary responsibility lies with Mr. Rafael Diaz. Contributory responsibility with Ms. Karen Diaz. Karen's breath caught behind her hand. Raphael's shoulders sank as if something had been unhooked inside his chest. In the hallway, Karen finally faced me. Dad, how could you do this? I held her gaze. No, Karen. How could you? I gave you everything. When you had a choice, you chose contempt. I'm not doing something to you. I'm refusing to let you erase me. She reached as if to touch my arm. I stepped back. Some wounds need more than a hand. That night the papers on my table were different. Orders stamped in ink that couldn't be argued with. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, my breath finally did too. I thought justice would bring silence. Instead, it brought unraveling. Evan arrived at dusk a week later, alone at the bottom of my stairs, hoodie too big, sneakers scuffed. "Mom doesn't know I'm here," he murmured. "I made tea, because sometimes heat should be soft." He stared at the table grain. "They said you ruined everything, that you wanted us to lose the house." I waited. His voice cracked. "But I saw court papers. The bad parts weren't your name." "Why would they say it was you?" "Because shame likes an easier villain," I said. "Believe what you see, not what you're told. Look at actions. If I hated your mom, would I have raised her? If I wanted you to suffer, would I have left when she told me to go?" He looked up, eyes bright. "Do you hate her now?" I took time with the answer. "No, but I don't trust her. Love without trust is a house without a foundation. It looks fine until the first storm." He nodded like the truth hurt, but fit. A few days later, he returned with a backpack and swollen eyes. "I can't stay there tonight." I opened the door. Words tumbled out between sobs, fights on the lawn, blame thrown like chairs, Raphael wishing out loud I were gone so the problem would end. I laid a blanket over him. The same one Karen dragged to the couch on winter nights when she was small and sat in the dark while he slept. The promise I'd made months ago wasn't only about justice for me anymore. It was about building a house with a real foundation, one quiet brick at a time, and letting the next generation feel a floor that would not give. The morning after, everything felt quieter, as if the world itself was catching its breath. Evan still sat at my table, shoulders hunched under the weight of things no boy should carry, yet his eyes carried a strange resolve. He had seen the storm and survived it. He had seen what contempt could do to a family. When Karen returned pounding at my door, her anger cracked into something thinner, something desperate. Her confession spilled like broken glass. Fear, greed, the illusion of safety. And though I let her words fall, I didn't rescue them. Some truths had to be faced, not cushioned. Evan stayed rooted beside me, and for the first time he refused her. It wasn't rebellion. It was clarity. She left in silence, carrying the first splinter of her own undoing. The courthouse that followed was a true reckoning. Mark's polished shoes and hollow charm collapsed under the weight of ink and signatures that told the real story. My lawyer didn't shout. She simply laid the truth bare, steady and unshaken. The gavel fell like a stone, and with it came the end of Mark and Karen's charade. The judgment wasn't just foreclosure. It was the cost of contempt finally come due. I felt Evan stiffen beside me as his parents crumbled, the boy torn between vindication and sorrow. And when Karen finally whispered, "Is this what you wanted?" I gave her the only truth left. I had never wanted this. I had wanted honesty. I had wanted family. But contempt had left me no choice. In the weeks that followed, silence filled the spaces where shouting used to live. Karen drifted, her pride cracked wide open. Mark drowned in bitterness until even his shadow disappeared. And yet, against all expectation, Karen came back, not with fury, but with exhaustion. "Dad," she whispered at my door, "I don't know where else to go." I didn't forgive her that night, but I didn't close the door either. Evan sat at our table, bridging the distance with his quiet presence. We weren't whole, but we were no longer at war. That was enough to begin again. Mark's final outburst came weeks later, rage spilling into my yard, fists shaking at ghosts only he could see. But anger without power is only noise. He left the street defeated, and I never saw him again. His absence was not a victory. It was simply the echo of his own choices. Karen, on the other hand, began to change. She left Mark, moved into a small apartment, and chose a different road, one without excuses, one with Evan at her side. She called me often now, her voice halting, awkward, but hers. Slowly, a wall built from years of contempt began to crumble. Evan became my shadow, helping me repair the old house, asking questions only a boy searching for meaning would ask. Grandpa, he said one evening, why didn't you just get in the car that night? Wouldn't it have been easier? I told him the truth. That surrendering would have been more costly than any bill. Dignity, once lost, is harder to win back than money. And for the first time, I saw him truly understand. He wasn't just listening to a story anymore. He was inheriting a lesson. Seasons shifted. Karen stood taller now, still marked by regret, but no longer defined by it. One winter evening, she raised a glass at my table and whispered, "Here's to new beginnings." And for the first time in years, I believed her. As the night deepened and the silence of the house wrapped around me, I thought back to that first day, the sting of coffee, the sharper sting of contempt, the vow I had made. It was never about revenge. It was about teaching them that contempt always costs more than it pays. And in that truth, I had finally found peace. Because dignity is not something you give away. It is something you guard, even if it costs you everything else. And when you protect it, you leave behind something more enduring than fortune. You leave behind the hope that the next generation will carry it further than you did. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. And when you're ready for the next story, click on the playlist waiting for you now.